Hey, and welcome to episode 138. Today, we're spicing things up with a sneak peek of one of the quirkiest board games heading our way in 2026, Dungeon Diners from BA Games. So here's the setup. Monsters have overrun the dungeons. And guess who wants them for dinner? Everyone. The demand for dragon wings, basilisk steaks, and barbecue hydra has forced restaurants and diners to seek out your adventuring company to go monster hunting for a tasty new menu item. It's a wild mix of dungeon crawling meets fine dining, and oh boy, it is deliciously chaotic. But it's more than just chunking monsters on a plate. It's a strategic game of exploration, engine building, and contract fulfillment. You'll manage your adventuring crew, take on contracts for dingy dungeon delicacies, claim hunting grounds, hunt those monsters, and build your team of marauders, all while navigating the dungeon's underbelly. So picture it. You're balancing which monsters to hunt, which contracts to fill, and how to level up your crew, and maybe even your company's reputation, all while dodging dungeon hazards and juggling dice rolls. Think resource management, clever timing, and just the right pinch of culinary madness. In this episode, we're going to tear into what makes Dungeon Diners so unique and hilarious, how serving monsters turns into a strategic tug of war, why it's going to cook up some serious laughs, and maybe a new gaming favorite in the coming year. So, sharpen those forks and ready your questing appetites. This is going to be a feast for your ears. It is Dinner Calls and Dungeon Crawls. With me today is the designer, Alex Lovin. Thanks for joining me, Alex. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great, PJ. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited to hear more about this game coming to us next year. And I'd like to be upfront. I have not seen this game. I've not playtested this game. I'm ashamed to admit. My wife had playtested a different game that's coming out by BA Games, and she's like, "Oh, you got to talk to these guys. Their games are all amazing." For those of you who maybe don't know, BA Games is probably most known for the Forges of Ravenshire, which we really enjoy. And so Alex is connected with me, and we're like, yeah, this sounds amazing. This cool. This game sounds crazy, and I don't know why anyone hasn't come up with this theme before. So thanks again for sharing your story with us this morning.
Absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about yourself first. Like, how did you get into the gaming hobby, and what was your first game that got you into the modern gaming world?
Oh, yeah. A little bit about myself was I actually did not get too into games until I was in my 20s almost. Realistically, back when I was younger, I would go over to some friends' houses. We'd play things like Catan, but it was like, oh, that's kind of the end all be all, I didn't know anything further. But then whenever it came to college, one of my roommates one day, he comes in and he says, "Oh, I got this cool new game. You got to check it out." And I'm like, "Okay, cool. Yeah, whatever it may be. Let's sit down. Let's play it." It's Terraforming Mars. And so I'm like, "Okay, well, yeah, let's see what this thing is like." And then, read through the rules. And I'm like, "Okay, this is a little more than the old Catan." But
Yep.
funny enough, it was sort of that one thing that the first time I played it, I was like, "Dang, this is awesome." And then it became a weekly occurrence. It was every week we'd get together, we'd play a game of Terraforming Mars, and then it started to evolve past that to where I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll check out some other good things. So I then learn about BGG. I start looking in the top 100, and I'm like, oh, if this is up there, there's got to be a bunch of other good stuff up there. And then it slowly but surely became this weekly meeting of, now, hey, we've moved on. We're doing deck builders. We're playing Dominion. We're playing, every which engine builder, every which tableau builder you can think of. And so it was really that time that I got into the hobby of board gaming quite a lot more. And then it wasn't until, I think it was right after COVID, about 2022. I think that was the first year that Origins came back to Columbus, because that's whenever I was,
That sounds right.
yeah, that's whenever I was in graduate school at the time in Columbus at OSU. And that's whenever I started to attend conventions. And then I got really, really into the hobby at that point.
Yep.
So yeah,
So was Origins your first gaming convention?
yeah, and I'm very happy it was, because from Origins, then going to something like Gen Con was definitely a big difference from A to B. Yeah.
Yes, we recently did a comparison of Origins and Gen Con and our experiences as part of our Gen Con recap episode. So listen to that one a few weeks ago, guys. But yeah, it's Origins is just it's so intimate and accessible without being overwhelming, I think is a good assessment.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you. I mean, you get the right mix of, there's still places to sit down and do stuff,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's big enough that you still get to see a lot of the companies that you know of.
And how fortunate, I mean, I'm trying to, for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, you could probably see I'm turning green with envy to be able to live so close to such a large convention, large by comparison of other smaller conventions, but to be so close to Origin, because what OSU's campus is like a mile, maybe two, just north of the convention center.
Yep, it's about 2 miles away. And so, funny enough, that first year, it was like, oh, okay, I'm going to go to work for part of the day, and then I'm going to drive over and then go to the convention for the other part. So it was the perfect place to be for that.
Yeah, I am jealous. That is cool. Otherwise, I have to drive 6 hours and pay for a hotel for 4 to 6 nights, and then 3 hours if I'm going to Gen Con. But still, it's just to be able to be right there is like that's a dream. Columbus is my second favorite city in the United States, and it has nothing to do with gaming, although that has a little bit to do with it. I mean, the food scene is amazing.
Oh, yeah.
And the gaming scene is just incredible in Columbus. So, if people are looking for alternatives to Gen Con, think about Origins. I know that our pocketbooks are tight right now, and so Origins is a good one. And you never know, you could end up designing your first game and on my show as a guest after your first experience at Origins. Right there it is.
So true.
Yeah. So when did you start? When did you get the idea for Dungeon Diners? So you said you were at Origins in 22. At what point did you decide I'm a game designer? I've got this game, and it's more than just an idea swirling in your gray matter.
Yeah. So it was actually, funny enough, 2021 whenever I first got the idea. So I like to say that it was a shower thought, because it was legitimately a shower thought. I'm sitting there in the shower and I'm like,
Yep.
oh man, this sounds kind of interesting, kind of cool. And I remember very, very clearly that right after coming out of the shower, I ran to the bedroom and I was like, I need a pencil, I need paper. We're writing this down. We're starting it. So that was when the idea first found, it's standing. But then from there, I never truly classified myself as a game designer until it was in 2023, right? So I had already been trying to design this for a couple years, and I have to say that the start of game designing, for someone that just is not familiar with it, it is a very big wake-up call to everything that happens on the back end. Because I'd be like, hey, this is really cool, this game is a great idea, and then I'd play test it with some friends and they're like, man,
You got problems.
Yeah, you have more problems than you can count. And so, and throughout that 2 years of getting into the design, it was more of a, I'm learning how to do this, but I wouldn't classify myself as a game designer. This is more of a passion project.
Sure.
It was in 2023 whenever I finally sat down with, it was actually another game designer on the scene. This was at Gen Con. I sat down with him and he said, no matter where this game goes, you can classify yourself as a game designer, because this is a game that could theoretically be published. And that's whenever I said, okay, I guess at this point I can call myself a game designer.
Yep.
Yeah.
I feel like, so as I've had this conversation with countless game designers in the past, content creators, publishers, there seems to be one. It's part of the reason why I still do this podcast and why I love it so much. And the stories are so important to bring to the table is the commonality. I keep thinking about, and I've quoted this before, the Roman orator Cicero. He said that all of the humanities are inherently linked as if by a common bond. And I'm thinking about times when I was in graduate school many, many moons ago, where I didn't think of myself as a writer, but my professor was like, if you put pen to paper, then you are a writer. You don't have to be published to consider yourself a writer. And that story you just told resonated with me on a very personal level. But I thought this, how similar all of our stories are. And I love that. I love that beauty about humanity. And I think that's great. So congratulations on being a board game designer.
Yeah, thanks.
I am not. Like, I don't even have like ideas, right? So I have ideas for other things, but not game design.
Yeah.
So that is really cool. So it's 2021. You're in the shower, right? That what you said?
Yep. That was it.
Goes. Yep. The bathroom's such a great place for inspiration, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, what else are you going to do while you're standing there
Exactly.
showering?
But it's interesting that you made. This is what I thought's interesting about the story. Putting aside location, is you were like, I have to commit this one to pen and paper, right? So, what was it in your mind? What was it about this idea that you knew, as opposed to other ideas? That this one, I was like, I gotta write this one down.
Yeah, it's a weird process because
Sure.
now I've gone through the ringer a couple more times because of course Dungeon Diners is the one that's currently up front, but there are some on the back end. But there's this level of, I don't want to call it necessarily intuition, but
Mm-hmm.
it definitely feels like intuition where I'll have ideas pop into my head and I'll just be like, oh, that's kind of cool, but it doesn't excite me to the point of wanting to run down and commit it to pen and paper.
Right.
But there's just something that ends up being really exciting about specific ideas that makes you want to do it. And I don't know if I can necessarily put that like as this quantifiable thing. It's
Yeah.
just, it's that piece of inspiration that really pushes you forward. Because even with Dungeon Diners, technically the base of the game, you're selling these monsters, you're fulfilling these orders. It's a pick up and deliver game. And before I had come up with this idea, I had never even heard of a pick up and deliver game. So it was kind of like one of these things that I'm like, wow, that sounds like a cool mechanic, first of all. And
Right.
then, starting to think a little deeper about it, I'm like, dang, that is a really interesting idea. And so it's not something that I could necessarily quantify, but it was just one of those things I'm like, that sounds really, really cool. And I really want to put it down so that I don't forget about it. And I
Right.
feel like that's when I can recognize that ideas are like really ready to push forward, is that it has to give me that passion, because I was never necessarily in the game of wanting to say, I'm going to publish this. It was more along the lines of, this is a passion project because I believe it will be fun. And I think me and my friends can sit down and play a
Sure.
good game. So yeah, I think that's where it really came from, was not really this want for anything in terms of popularity. It was just, I want to make this game because I
Yeah.
think it'll be cool and I think other people will like it.
So in those early stages, and so this is before you had heard the term pick up and deliver.
Mm-hmm.
When you envisioned this game, was it what we now know as a pick up and deliver, or was it something else? And then you learned about pick up and deliver mechanic, and you're like, "Oh, that's better,"
No,
or
it was,
was pick up and deliver the adjective that helped you to describe what you envisioned?
yeah, it was the adjective that helped me describe what I envisioned,
Okay.
because it follows a lot of the traditional pick up and deliver mechanical vibes, but it comes with such a different set of mechanics. Like the way that I would describe Dungeon Diners just as a whole is, it's such an intricate interweaving of different game mechanics that essentially takes the pick up and deliver and elevates it to this different, I guess, level. It's not like the only thing that you're thinking about is fulfilling those orders. A lot of it comes down to, okay, but we're on a shared board with other people. And it is a closed economy, right? There is a limited number of monster resources out there. And so it's like, okay, if I slay these monsters now and I take them off the board, this is beneficial for me, not just because of the orders that I can fulfill, but because now I can claim this spot. And we call it camping, where essentially, if you're the last person that slays a monster on a tile, then you get to throw a camp down. And that gives you other bonuses on the side. And so it's one of those things where you're focusing on the grand goal of fulfilling these orders, but also this grand goal of making money from this market economy while managing these camping systems, all while making sure your opponents don't get to do that before you. And so when we think
Okay.
about pick up and deliver as a general game mechanic, a lot of times you have this focus on there's really a small amount of things that you're trying to go for, like those orders are the end all be all. But in reality, with Dungeon Diners, what we would normally say internally is that there's about 4 different systems that we would say are the majority scoring points in your game. And so if you are to only focus on a single one of these systems, odds are you're not going to win. So unlike a traditional pick up and deliver game, we're really forcing the idea of your focus towards multiple different areas. And so that's where I would say we start to really pull on this traditional pick up and deliver idea of just get the things you need and take them where they need to go, because that's not always the best option. Sometimes the best option is, if this thing is worth a lot of money, who cares if I fulfill this order that may give me extra points now, because that money could pay off later. Or, man, these things aren't worth much, but if I throw down a camp on this spot, like, I get this extra bonus that's then going to catapult me forward in the game.
So is there a dungeon crawling element to it? Do you have to explore the dungeon first, or
Yeah.
So is it executed through tiles or cards, or is there a board? Like,
Yeah, so the main
yeah.
board is set up as hex tiles, right?
Okay.
So it comes out as it's 6 rows of 5, so about 30 hex tiles is what you end up with. And on each of these is a set of tokens. And those tokens identify the type of monster that's on that tile and the number of the monsters that are on that tile.
Okay.
So throughout the game, one of the other side pieces that you need to focus on is everything underneath the top of the dungeon, because you're exploring downward, is hidden. And so
Okay.
you are using separate actions of scouting to actually reveal those tiles to discover what types of monsters are there. And so it adds this essentially element of, it's really the main randomized, random element of the game, where as you go down, you can be searching for specific types of monsters. There's no guarantee you're going to find them, right? But as you go deeper, your odds of finding them are greater because the more monsters populate each tile.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so all of that's wrapped
yeah.
up in this additional scoring system of scouting, which is one of the main 4 that I would say are contributing to your final score.
Okay. Is there, because I know people are going to want to know, are there minis, standees, just pawns to represent you or the monsters, or what's that going to look like?
Yeah, so there are just pawns to represent you, but for the monsters, since we're dealing with such a large number, they're generally going to be represented with small cubes, or when we do the nice, upgraded version, whatever represents the monster themselves. Because there are times that you will flip over tokens on a tile, and there's up to 16 monsters there. So it's not like we can get all those standees in. But yeah, so it's primarily just resource counters based on, either cubes or a representative symbol.
So I took some license with my introduction, but tell me a little bit about, because I mentioned a few descriptive monsters in the intro. What kind of monsters will players encounter in the dungeon?
Yeah. So some of the monsters are quite tame, but they contribute to this idea of eating them. So we have things like living mushrooms, carnivorous plants, those things. You can make them into salads, nice and easy.
Okay.
We also have stuff like manticore, right? Manticore being the wonderful scorpion, bat, lion mixture. Comes with a lot of fun food ingredients. You can use the wings as wraps. You can use the body as steaks, so on and so forth. And then we also have Phoenix, for anybody who's hungry for chicken. It's quite the quite the reminiscent little thing. But then, of course, we do have Dragon. And Dragon is the one monster that just doesn't act like the others in the dungeon, because essentially Dragon acts as a special resource. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily like this big wild resource, but rather it requires more party members to take down, right? So you have to slay it with a bunch more guys in your party. But then you also have, it sells for higher prices. It also nets you more points if you can get it. And it's also much rarer on the board. So those 5 are the main monsters that you're going to be seeing in the dungeon. And of course, you're going to be taking them, slaying them, and selling off their tasty parts to make good dishes.
So you're I'm picturing like a public market of cards,
Hmm.
which would be maybe contracts or, that are demanding certain types of monsters or, resources so that they can make their dishes. Are you making the dishes yourself as the restaurateur, or are your contracts coming from restaurants who will then serve customers?
Yeah, so it is the latter, right? You are
Oh,
just taking the monster parts, and then the restaurants are cooking it up into
okay.
the very tasty dishes. And so, like you said, there's a public global market mat
Okay.
that everyone can pull off of, but then you can also take these orders directly to your hand, right? And so every order also has a good amount of flavor, pun intended, where we essentially have not only what is required for the dish and the location to take it to, but then there's also, it looks like a little recipe book, the cards all do. And so it has a description of the recipe along with a name, just to give a little bit more, I guess, diving into the actual lore and flavor of the
Right.
world that we've created.
So, what was your inspiration for this game?
Yeah. So I will say that at first, this game did not have the same theme. It was actually
Okay.
only once I signed that the theme changed, because it
Okay.
was originally going to be a fur trading game. All right.
Okay.
Which completely outside of the what we're seeing now. But it was because someone else recommended me. They were like, this would be a really cool fur trading game. And then over time, I get a lot of people that are saying, why would you go with fur trading? That's such a boring theme. So and that is when it got changed. But what the inspiration came from was Sam from BA Games says, all right, I have some homework for you in terms of what I think we should do with this. And he said, go sit down on your couch and watch the entirety of Delicious in Dungeon. So if anyone's seen that, it's an anime. It's on Netflix.
Okay.
That runs off of a pretty similar premise that as these individuals are going down into this dungeon, they don't have much food with them, so they have to slay and eat monsters to essentially survive. And so it was like, oh, okay, that's an interesting premise. And
Hmm.
it takes this idea of this whimsical theme alongside a somewhat serious strategic board game, and it kind of it gives it a little more life than just fur trading, which of course does not sound as exciting and happy. So yeah, that's really where it came from, was looking at Delicious in Dungeon and using that as kind of this idea starter for what we
Right.
wanted it to look like.
So when you first mentioned that the original concept was fur trading, I was thinking about the early French colonists and explorers here in the New World, and the fur trade with the French Canadians and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot, which sounds like GMT would love that type of a game. But I gotta say, I love this theme of dungeon crawling to get, kill, and slay monsters or harvest plants, which I think is incredible. Like, you even have like vegetables, right? Or vegetarian inspired dishes. Like, you could just go and, you know, harvest
Yeah.
mushrooms and other things if you want to a less challenging exploration into the dungeon, or safer exploration. So it's cool. You can forage or you can hunt. And I rather like that. That's kind of a unique concept. So it sounds to me like you had implemented game system and a mechanic that applied to this theme that Sam at BA Games was like, you need to check this out. And that's
Yeah.
how it kind of evolved.
Yeah. And that's honestly how I prefer to design. Like
Yeah.
most games that I have come up with have been very heavily based on mechanics first and then think about the theme. And I think it's because, there is this interplay between theme can help define mechanics and
Yep.
mechanics can help define theme.
Yes.
But realistically, in my mind, I want to make sure that the game system is as solid as possible
Mhm.
before saying, okay, now how can we tweak it with this theme to make it even better in this way?
Right.
So yeah, that's really where I come from on the side
Okay.
of designing. Is I do prefer mechanics first. I know that other people prefer theme first.
I'm a theme guy, right? I do love theme. I think that's really interesting because I don't know too many people who are mechanics first. So I think that's fascinating. When you are when you were in the process of designing a game, do you after Dungeon Diners, I'm sure you have other ideas.
Yeah.
And you now have a full repertoire of game mechanics at your disposal that maybe you didn't have when you first had this idea. Is there a favorite game mechanic that you love to start with in your design process?
I would say that probably one of my favorites, but it's also very difficult to implement, would be engine building,
Yep.
right? I mean, come on. One of my first games was Terraforming Mars. It's one of those things that I can't deny. Engine building is in my blood, but it's also one of those things that I just get really excited to be like, this is where I started the game, and now I'm here, and I'm doing crazy stuff by
Right.
comparison to what I started with. So engine building is always one of those that I just love to play around with and start with. That being said, man, is it hard to make sure that you can balance things like that. So, I mean, Dungeon Diners, one thing is, like I said, really 2021, it's now 2025, we're leaning into 2026.
Sure.
So it's clearly been a time since the game started being designed. And part of that is we took the entire year from last Origins, so Origins of 2024, all the way up to Origins of 2025. And all that was designed for was just balance. All of
Mm,
the systems in the game were already implemented. And theoretically, we could have just said, all right, it's good to go. We can ship it. But instead, it was one of those things that we said, no, what it needs to be is every time that someone plays this game, they need to have a great gameplay experience. Right. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that you can play it and be, relatively non strategic and then end up winning the game. You won't be anywhere close. But what it means is that from the beginning, everyone can sit there and say that they have a shot. And every move that you make now determines whether or not you win the game.
mm.
So it is very heavily dependent on how well you do and how much you think about what you're doing. So yeah, whenever it comes to engine builders, balance is difficult because we also have another game on the back end that is, it has started going into its balance time, and it's probably going to take another 6 months to a year in order to get it fully balanced. And it completely differs from other like games that are a little smaller, thinking about little card games, because I also have one of those on the back end. And the crazy thing about the card game, the one thing that struck me way off guard was, I mean, I started this thing only about 2 or 3 months ago, and it's already to the point that I'm like, oh, hey, it's balanced and it's really good. We may be able
Mm.
to actually push this thing forward and be done earlier. But it's like, that card game, it still has really good, intricate mechanics, but it does not require as much balance as something that's much heavier and much more on that
Right.
engine building side.
Right. So I want to ask you about, I typically ask, I think I ask everyone about it, but so you're a mechanics first guy and you really lean into engine building. And as you just described to us, the challenge is maintaining balance. So how difficult was it for you in the playtesting process of trying to achieve balance? How easy was it or difficult for you to be vulnerable and open your idea up to people and they're like, this is rubbish or this is amazing?
Yeah, it is super difficult the first time you have to do it,
Mm.
because you can walk in and say that, man, this is awesome. And you will likely see someone that says, no, this is bad. And I mean, the first time that that happened to me, I was very, very, what would the word be? I was kind of like cagey about it, like
Okay.
very much so, just a little mad mixed with
Yeah.
wanting to be like, no, no, this is great, this is great. And one of the things that I started to realize throughout designing, which this is a useful tip for others, is it doesn't hurt to try something else,
Mm.
right? So, for example, when I signed on with Sam, he had some major complaints with the way that some things were working, and I was like, no, no, it works great, it's awesome. And then he and I both came to an agreement of, how about this? Rather than accepting this as a blanket, it's going to be changed forever, we just try this. We take this system and we implement it in a different way. And I said, I don't believe you, but I'll try it. We'll see what happens. And what I started to learn was I implemented the new system, and it was also bad. But what it did, it's funny, because what it ended up doing was, by me implementing that system, I looked at both of those systems and said that, you know what, maybe this isn't the best way to do it. And it helped me come up with an idea that then was implemented and now is in the final game. So it's one of those things that, like, as you go through the playtesting stage, there are things that you'll think are really good, but in reality, they might be good. The question is, how can you make it great? Because one of the grand big things that I've learned from designing over time is that, you can take something and you can make it a good game, and you can put in this amount of time and say that you're good to go. But in reality, there is a threshold that you meet that says, yeah, this game is good, but you need to change it to make it great. Right. And that may take way more time. I mean, heck, it took a year's time of balance for us. But it was all for that purpose of making it great. And so every time that we would run into a playtest and we would have something wrong, I would sit there with Sam. And one of my favorite parts about working with Sam at BA is that Sam is also a game designer, right? He was the one that designed the first 3 games that they have released. So Cult of the Deep, Forges of Ravenshire, Goats and Goblins. He was the guy that was doing all of that. And so unlike some other publishers that may not have designers as their, main people that talk with the other designers.
Sure. Yep.
Sam and I would sit down and we would hash it out. We would have these disagreements. I would say, no, that's a bad idea. And then he would say, oh, but what about this? And I'd say, that's a better idea. How about this? And then we would come to an agreement of, this is probably the best way to move forward. Mm-hmm. But the important part was, the first piece of feedback that you need from that is, this sucks. How can we fix it? Yeah. And so that's the tough part about playtesting, but it's also where you get all of the feedback that essentially says, I mean, if you're getting this piece of feedback from a small subset of population, and then let's say that you were to ship out this game with a larger population, you have just essentially seen that same complaint come up in the same percentage of the population. So if 10% of the people that you playtested with say that this mechanic needs fixed, then you can imagine you're going to make 10% of the people that you give that game to upset.
Yeah.
And so it's got to be fixed in some way, shape, or form, because in reality, if you're looking at the margin of what you want to have people upset by, it's got to be less than like even 0.5%. It's got to be so minimal that, you can have people that enjoy it, and there's not really something that immediately leaves a bad taste in their mouth and they want to play it again.
Right. So there it goes. You've got to be willing to be vulnerable, and you don't want to be in an echo chamber, right? That's the killer, right? That's how right behind every bad idea can be the great one,
So true.
There's a famous quote in there somewhere. I don't know it, but I really wish I could recall it, because I was just thinking about that. That's great. So tell me a little bit about, I think it's interesting that, and while you're not the only designer who's been on this show that has done the same thing as you, but you chose to go with a publishing house as opposed to self-publishing through Kickstarter or GameFound, where the majority of first-time game designers go. And while it sounds like your partnership with BA Games has been a positive one, what ultimately drew you to making that decision?
Yeah, so when it came to publishing with a publishing company versus self-publishing, I think the first thing that struck me as, I don't think that I can self-publish, is the actual scale of the game I was working on. I mean, we're talking about, this boy is a little bit larger than something that I would want to handle as a first-time designer. But the other piece of the puzzle came from the fact that I also recognized that without knowing much about the industry in terms of the back end of publishing, I probably couldn't provide the best product to other people. There was the odds of it even being a great product would be greatly diminished. And so, with that in mind, I said, I would much rather have someone that knows that well on that back end handle that side of things. But there was the one main requirement with the publishing side of things, which was I would not go with a company that wouldn't allow me to have my hand in it the entire way. Right? So the one thing that I just could not let happen was that, because again, this was a passion project for me from the beginning. It was never
Sure.
necessarily meant to be, this money making thing. It was if someone essentially were to take my idea and then, take the game and start making major changes to it, and then, I not have a good percentage of that final say, I don't know if I could have been comfortable with, having my name on that product. And so when it came to going around, man, let me tell you what, breaking through as a first-time designer and getting people to sit down and listen to you it's very difficult. I mean, I am somewhat awkward when it comes to walking up to people and just cold talking to them, but man, sometimes at conventions you have to do it. You walk up with that sell sheet and it is the most awkward thing in the world. I really, really, really disliked that portion of it. But the one interesting thing about it was, a lot of times you'll walk up to a publisher, you'll be like, hey, you want to hear about my game idea? And they're like, yeah, elevator pitch it to me, I'll give you like 3 minutes. And so you talk about it. And then they're like, they either shoot you down right there, which honestly that one is still really awkward, because then it's like, oh, how do I end the conversation now?
Right.
But then there's other times that they'll say, no, yeah, like we'll get back to you, we'll talk to you. Then there's others that are interested. And funny enough, Sam was not necessarily one of those that was immediately like on it, like I'm interested. And part of it came down to the theme. What it was, he's like, oh, talk to me after Origins and we'll see if we can find a time. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So I took his card, I go back home, and it's about 2 weeks later, and I'm like, okay, well, I'll reach out to this guy, because on the sell sheet, it has my email and such, and I'm like, oh, maybe he'll remember me, maybe he'll reach out to me. But then it took a couple emails of pestering to say, come on, just sit down and play it, because I'm like, if someone sits down and plays the game, I'm fairly confident they'll like it. And then finally he was like, okay, we'll schedule a time, we'll sit down, we'll play it. And that was really the start of it. But yeah, it's one of those things that deciding to go through a publisher, it's another one of those situations that you got to be vulnerable, because you have to be ready to walk up to them, to give them a 3-minute pitch. And for most likely, because it was about 10 publishers that just straight up cold cut said,
Sure.
not happening. And you got to be ready for it, because it's hard. It is emotionally a difficult process to do, but it was definitely worth it to end up in the position that I'm in.
I completely identify with you there. While I have no problems coming up to people and being like, let's chat. I'm not afraid to talk to people at all. But when trying to promote the podcast, which, it's still small time, right? But going up to publishers and designers and just inviting people on, right? And I don't invite every designer on. It's like I'm walking the vendor hall at Origins and I see a game and I really like it, and I'm like, oh, the designer's here, I want to invite them on because I really like the game. Or it's like, or I really like the publisher and their line of games, and if they got more stuff. And this is a perfect example. I really like what's coming out of BA Games, and for, I guess it was Dave that I spoke to at Origins, for him to pass my information to you and be like, you should talk to this guy, is really exciting. And I'm glad that I was able to have you on. I'm glad you reached out, and I appreciate that. But how do you, because I struggle with this too, how do you personally keep yourself motivated when you get those discouraging brush offs or ghosted, or like, so what do you do to keep yourself motivated and keep going with this project?
That is a good question, because there was a period of time following all of those just flat out rejections that it was really, really, really tough for me to keep going, because I'm like, man, maybe this thing isn't what I thought it was.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know what I'm doing. And I think what it boiled down to was there were a couple of very influential people in terms of talking with them and them keeping me motivated. And one of them that I want to shout out is his name's Paul Solomon.
Mm-hmm.
So he is
Yep.
the designer of Honey Buzz. He's got a couple with Genius Games in there. But Paul and
He was a guest on here just before Gen Con.
well, there we go. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a great guy. And he was also the one that told me, no matter where this goes, you can count yourself as a designer.
Mm.
But Paul was a great person to talk to about all this because essentially he was sort of giving me a little bit of motivation in terms of, yeah, like not everything is for everybody. Some of these companies just, they probably don't want a game of this type, or they may not like the mechanic of pick up and deliver. And so just being able to really talk with someone that could give a little bit of motivation as well as a little guidance helped out. So I would say that part of it leans into this idea of mentorship. I would say that overall, Paul was a great mentor as a previous designer to end up talking to. And then the other side of it is Sam is a great mentor also in the side of design and publishing. And so having those individuals that are able to essentially say, okay, like there's good and bad to both sides of the situation. It really depends on how tenacious you are. It gives you a little bit of motivation to actually push forward and continue on. And so throughout the entirety of this process, there have been times that I've been, really tired of doing stuff and like, man, this is just, it's dragging on, keeps getting old. It's the idea that, you can look at it right now and it's kind of a drag, but in the future, there is that potential that people are going to love it. And so really, I didn't see any major fruition for this game for about 2 years. But then this year was the first time that we got to sit down and show it at Origins. We showed it at Gen Con. We actually had a full table with events, and the feedback was just incredible. It was the first time that I was able to have people sit down that complete strangers, and they would say things like, this is an awesome game and I am so excited for it to come out. And so it's like, yeah, at the time I wouldn't see that payoff, but now that I'm seeing it, it's giving me more confidence. And I think what that also bleeds into is, for the first design, it's always that just, you don't see any payout until it first hits. But now after seeing this payout, I've been so incredibly motivated to actually sit down and do other designs because it's like, I know now what's on the back end. And so that is now keeping me motivated in these other designs to really push those forward because I know what.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's because that's a personal one that I struggle with all the time, trying to get the podcast out there. And it's like, it's like, I feel like, it's like, oh, people should know, I get egotistical sometimes. Like, people should know who Meeple to Meeple is. And they're like, oh, I've never heard. And I'm like, oh boy. So that was the first hurdle I had to jump over. And the next one was, I need to come up with an elevator pitch, right? Because I'm trying to convince a publisher, convince a designer, convince a content creator to come onto the show and just take a chance on me.
Yeah.
I just love talking. So I'm just going to keep doing this. And until somebody says, dude, you got to get off the. So what would you say to folks who are like, okay, why should we get your game? What is it? What really makes it shine and pop? What's that one thing, right? If you were to talk to people like, potential customers, why should they buy your game?
Oh man, I don't even know if it's just one thing. It's the whole experience, So yeah, I mean, different people love different things, right? But one of the most beautiful things that I've seen, especially come from playtesting of Dungeon Diners, is almost anyone can love it at any age, and almost everyone can understand it, which I think is quite incredible given the size of game that it is. But the reason for that is the intuitiveness of the game mechanics, right? Everything that you do has a specific purpose, but that purpose is completely under this umbrella of the goal of the game. Every action that you do is pushing you towards that goal in some way, shape, or form. even if it's just minor things that seem like they're not doing much. I mean, I have had people come to the table, sit down. I had an 8-year-old at one point, which was probably one of the most interesting ones. That was at Origins. And I was like, oh, what kind of games do you really like to play? Because, I try and get this little gauge of where they stand. And it
Sure.
was a bunch of little light things, little light games. And I'm like, okay, this one might be a little bit of a challenge. But then what I end up finding is, you know, people will, I'll give them the teach, which is a little bit front loaded, but then they take 2 turns and I'm like, okay, are there any questions about that, like the game in general, or the way things are going? And everyone's like, no, it all makes sense. Like, you can let us go and play this game. And I think that is, despite not being this really crazy, like, oh my gosh, this is the coolest thing ever. It's actually something that I think is really amazing because, I mean, you can play tons of games that are heavy, and some of them just have these really niche, crazy mechanics. But the way that we've designed this one, in terms of thinking about what all makes sense, it really comes into this nice package of, there are no mechanics in this game that are, extraneous. Nothing here is, not meant to drive the game in some way, shape, or form.
Okay.
And so that's what I would say is the really amazing thing, is if you sit down and you play it. I have only found like 1 or 2 people that didn't fully connect and understand everything that was happening in the game. But the funny part about that is they were also the only ones that did not pay attention during the teach. Yeah, that was the only ones that I found that weren't able to do it. But we've had a good mix of people come sit down at the table. Everyone's been able to understand it, and for the most part, everyone absolutely loves it.
That is cool. I love that intuitive nature of the design. Like, that's incredible. Like, I'm ready to play, right? I mean, it sounds incredible. The theme really gets to me. As a theme guy, I love that.
Yeah.
And you want that beautiful marriage of theme and mechanics, and this whole idea, right? Because one of the frustrating things about, a lot of like D&D or other dungeon crawling games, there's like a narrative or whatever, and someone reads out of a book, or you've got voice actors who do that on the apps and stuff like that, and it's like, we're going to kill a monster. Now, there'll be monsters in the way, but we're going to go kill the one big monster. Okay. For treasure. And it's always some generic concept of treasure. I love that you're going in there to hunt monsters so you can bring out the corpses so that you could sell them to a restaurateur to feed people. Like, that's crazy. And if you don't like to go hunting, you can just forage for, like, that's a great theme. And it sounds like you really were blessed with a partnership with BA Games, and that worked out really well.
Absolutely.
Is there, like, in this experience, do you have like one piece of advice for first time designers who were to approach you? Like, what one thing you would tell them?
Yeah, I would say the one thing that I would say is probably the most important was what we were talking about earlier with feedback. So one thing that someone told me once, I can't remember who it was, but they said to me, the way someone feels is truth, right? So no matter what, the emotions that someone feels from playing your game is what they feel. And there is no way that you can change that. And
Right.
so if they feel a certain way about a certain mechanic, that doesn't mean that you can just completely disregard that feeling. You have to sit there and actually think about what that means in the grand scheme of your game, and whether or not that needs to be changed. Because there are some times that, yeah, stuff definitely needs to be changed, because you hear that feeling and you think about it for a while and you say, yeah, I guess that is a pretty underlying issue with this. But then there are other times where you look at it and you say, okay, like, they did feel that way, but maybe there's a deeper reason as to why. Maybe there was something that happened during their specific play that ended up making them feel this way. And that could be a problem. That could just be a result of something that was done that may have been unoptimal, and then they don't love the fact that it's unoptimal, or something of the sorts. So the one piece of advice I would give is the way people feel is truth to them. And so
Mhm.
you really need to take that into consideration and think about whether or not that is something that needs to be changed, or whether or not that is something that you can just say, okay, there is a reasoning behind it and I know what that is. And then maybe in the future, if it happens again, maybe we look deeper into it. But for right now, maybe it's okay.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that's great advice. I think that's great advice for just anybody in life in general. So thanks for that. So Alex, tell the folks listening where they can find you. When's the game coming out? All the things they need to know.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in terms of being able to find me, I do go to two major conventions, those being Origins and Gen Con. Whether or not I'm at other conventions, to be determined. You never know. But if you ever want to contact me and ask any questions, it is alex.lovins1999 at gmail.com. So you can email me. I should be able to answer anything that you ask about. And then also, I will throw in the pitch there that if you really want a good publisher that can listen to what you have to say, sit down, try things, tell you straight up whether or not something is good or bad. Because I mean, again, I have pitched other things to BA Games, and Sam and I are on the complete understanding of if something is bad, he will tell me. And I respect that a lot, because what it does is it lets us make great things together. Like I said, we want the games to be good, not or to be great, not just good.
Right.
So yeah, I would say that if you want a publisher to discuss with like that, BA Games is great to talk to. And so you can email Sam. It's all on their website, bagames.com. And then in terms of, oh man, what was the last thing I
When
was
is
supposed
when is the
Oh,
game
yeah,
set to
when
be
is it coming out?
released?
Yeah, so the game is supposed to be released, hopefully, a Kickstarter in the early spring/late winter. That way, it'll be up for retail later in 2026.
All right. So there you go, guys. Dungeon Diners by BA Games, designed by Alex Lovins. Alex, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it. Guys, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. We have hit our 1 year goal. We have just over 100 subscribers now. And the next goal for the next year is to have 1,000 followers or subscribers. So please subscribe to the channel and continue. So we've got a lot more coming in the new year. I've got a couple of series that I want to do with content creators on one hand, with other podcasters on the other. So keep watching and help us in our mission of uniting players around the world and sharing our stories. And as always, be kind to one another and let's play more games.